Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to present here. So I'm going to talk about how to diagnose and manage mesh-related complications after hernia repair, up to but not including mesh removal. So these are my disclosures, funding for a course I put on for fellows, and I've consulted as an expert witness as well. So I think the first thing we need to do is actually define what are the complications of interest here. So this is a study from the MAUD database, which is an FDA database where both manufacturers as well as users can input complications related to medical devices. And this study looked at 252 hernia repairs with complications, and this is the list of potential complications. And the top was infection, which is 42%, followed by mechanical failure, 18%, pain, reaction, intestinal complications, et cetera. So what I thought we would do is kind of try and hit some of the highlights here. So let's start with infection. So when we're talking about mesh infection and getting through this without an operation, essentially what we're talking about is mesh salvage. So this paper was referenced a little bit earlier. This is a study from Jeremy Warren and the group out of Greenville, South Carolina, looking at 213 prosthetic mesh infections, 38 of which were enteroprosthetic fistulas. And to this group's credit, this was actually a complicated group to manage. Over half of them were diabetics. Average BMI was 35, and 28% were smokers. Mesh was placed in multiple locations. Most commonly it was intraperitoneal, and there was 18% placed retromuscular and 12% in the on-lay position. And permanent barrier-coated mesh was the most common, with flat sheet mesh being the second most common. So when you look at this data, the real question is, can we completely salvage the mesh? Not have to do anything with it, maintain a good durable repair. And when you look at by mesh type and mesh position, what jumps out at you is that 26 of these were macroporous polypropylene meshes, and that 20 of the 31 salvage were in the retromuscular position. So if you have a chance of salvaging mesh and getting through this without performing an operation and removing the mesh, it's going to be with these mesh characteristics in this mesh position. Notably, though, things like EPTFE or composite meshes, which in this study was all PTFE and polypropylene meshes, none of those were salvageable, at least completely. So what about partial mesh salvage? Does it get any better if we just say, can we just take out a little bit of mesh and still maintain a durable repair? Well, the data doesn't really change. This is still about macroporous polypropylene placed in a retromuscular position, and still consistently PTFE does not perform well, and neither do the composite meshes. So those are the characteristics of what you can salvage, but how do we actually salvage it? And the first thing is, obviously, if there's an infection there, you need to drain it, treat it with antibiotics systemically, but is there anything we can do as an adjunct to try and salvage this? This is just a case report, 2 cases from Mike Rosen. And what he did was actually instill gentamicin into the drain itself for 4 weeks, doing it 3 times a day. And he found that this was helpful. He's actually one of my partners, and I can tell you that he still does this occasionally. And I've seen it work successfully, so this is something you could potentially take home and do differently. What I will say is that it can be challenging, though. You have to get your infectious disease team on board if you want to get this done at home. Getting the gentamicin is not always going to be the easiest thing as far as instillment through the drain. What about a situation like this? This is the alternative. Obviously, infection we want to salvage, but when it gets exposed, this is sort of a different situation, which is still you're trying to get this ingrowth without getting it infected. This is a case where we actually had an ALT flap on top of a major abdominal wall reconstruction, and then the ALT flap went down. So this is what we were left with, and we tried to salvage this situation. And the first thing to do is sort of get rid of the dead material underneath. Things are not going to grow into that. Clear out any infection, and then manage this as you would with any wound, whether it's dressings or wound vac, which is ultimately what we went to. And this actually went pretty well. The biggest issue here was the proline sutures that you see in there, which you can probably imagine that there was some issues with that, and that this is the one area that did not really heal well was related to those proline sutures. So what are the principles of salvaging exposed mesh? First off, know the mesh characteristics, because again, macroporous polypropylene is going to do better than a microporous, and EPTFE is not going to do well at all. Evacuate any active infection, debride any necrotic tissue, so you have healthy tissue for this to try and heal to. And then it's just about local wound care. And wound vac should be used as long as you're not getting directly onto bowel. One thing to note is as you go through this process, you may find that you're salvaging a lot of the mesh, but as you take the wound vac off, you can have areas of the mesh that are not incorporated. If you're going through this for a couple weeks and then you have areas that are not incorporated, you might as well start chipping those pieces off because they're not going to ingrow after at that point. Enteroprosthetic fistulas, these are unsalvageable, so don't try. If there's a fistula there, it needs an operation, so I'm not going to talk any more about this, although what is notable is that the average time to presentations for these fistulas was 4 years, so always consider these as potential abdominal wall infection sites, even 4 years after their operations. Mechanical failure. By definition, this is not something you should be leaving in the body. It's either cause of recurrence or there's some issue with the mesh, and so I'm not going to talk about trying to salvage this without actually removing the mesh. So what about pain? I'm going to kind of shift gears from ventrals to inguinals because this is kind of more in my wheelhouse. So this is a lot of mesh that I've removed. We're going to see if we can do anything to avoid actually removing that. So what I always like to counsel people on if they're approaching a patient who has chronic groin pain after an inguinal hernia surgery is first and foremost is to acknowledge their pain. It's probably one of the most common complaints that I hear when I have people come and see me for this is that they never felt like they were heard. And it automatically makes them feel bad about their hernia repair, it makes them feel bad about the medical system. And often if you reassure these people that there's not harm going in and recognize the difference between hurt and harm, just because something's hurting you, it doesn't mean that it's actually causing harm to your body. If they have low level of pain, you can actually reassure them and then you're done with that. And some people will say, okay, well, I just needed to know that what was happening in my body and then I'm not concerned that something bad is going on. The other thing is, if you want to try to avoid removing mesh, try and distinguish between neuropathic and nociceptive pain. If this is neuropathic, you can distinguish that as sharp, burning, radiating, something that's more related to a nerve. It might be a nerve injury, and that might be something that you can treat with a neurectomy, with injections, with ablation, rather than actually removing their mesh. And I always advise that if you're going to manage these patients, review any previous operative records so you understand what was done, what mesh you might be dealing with. One of the things I find is helpful, obviously, on examination when you're managing these people, you got to rule out a hernia recurrence. But if you're trying to look for ways to avoid mesh removal, see if this is related to somebody's nerve, and you can do this through dermatomal mapping, where you take a marking pen, put gentle pressure on their skin, ask them to say, does this feel normal? Does it feel like there's pain? Or do you feel numbness here? And when you finish that, you get a map that looks something like this, and you say, okay, well, this might be ilioinguinal distribution, and I'm going to try and treat this either with injections, ablation, or neurectomy, and avoid actually taking somebody's mesh out. In managing these people for pain, I always recommend you get imaging, whether it's ultrasound or MRI. Those are the best things to look for nerve issues. You're not going to see those on CT scan, although CT scans are great because as surgeons, we tend to be more capable at reading these, and we see what's on there a little bit better. But if you're really looking for nerve anatomy, a dynamic ultrasound or an MRI is what's going to be your friend. So what are some of your non-surgical therapies that you can start with for these patients? Everybody should have, if you're going to try and manage them with medications, an adequate trial of a medication, and Neurontin or gabapentin or the gabapentinoids are probably the least appropriately used medications when trying to start somebody because these medications do have a high side effect profile. The way I always like to tell patients is what we're going to do is we're going to start this at a low dose, and we're going to treat you to effect, whether that's side effect or desired effect, which is treatment of their pain. And if you hit side effects first, then you've failed. But if you've hit a treatment, then that's perfect. And for these patients, an adequate trial really is 8 weeks minimum of these medications, slowly going up on them. Cymbalta, classically known as an antidepressant, actually has an FDA indication for management of chronic musculoskeletal pain and can be very helpful for these patients as well. Physical therapy is something that a lot of us will reflex send people to as a first thing, and I would say that that's fine. And I think for people with vague, low-level musculoskeletal pain, that is very much appropriate. But if somebody comes in and they have mechanical pain, and you can feel that it's related to a piece of mesh, then you're probably torturing those people by sending them to physical therapy. So it can be appropriate, but just be cognizant of what somebody's actually feeling and what you might be sending them to. Injections, I think it's okay to do this in the office if you're trying to do this as far as treating their pain acutely. But if you're using it for a form of diagnosing and trying to determine whether or not you're going to do an intervention that avoids mesh removal and doing a neurectomy or ablation, it should be ultrasound guided with low levels of anesthetic or steroids so you know you're placing it directly next to the nerve. And then based off of that, if they have long-term resolution, great, you can do repeated injections. If it's acute, then you can consider ablation or neurectomy rather than mesh removals. So everybody always wants an algorithm for what to do with chronic groin pain. I think it's more of a matrix when you have to consider these 4 things into what your success is going to be. Probably first and foremost is going to be the impact on somebody's quality of life, mesh location itself and the risks associated with this, as well as chronicity. If somebody comes in 15 years after, it's hard to necessarily blame that on their mesh or their hernia repair. And again, neuropathic versus nociceptive to try and avoid mesh removal. So last, I'm going to talk about reaction. Obviously, when we put mesh in somebody's body, your body is meant to react to it. That is a natural response. It is considered foreign, so you want to encase that as you recognize it as unself. There is this interesting concept of the Asia syndrome, which is an autoimmune syndrome that's induced by adjuvants. This is described in hernia mesh, but it's also been described with breast implants as well as orthopedic implants. And I'm only bringing this to your attention because I see more and more people who are aware of this and want to know if somehow this is happening inside of them. In order to make this diagnosis, you do have to have 2 of the major criteria, which is either exposure to the stimulus, or these typical rheumatologic findings, or addition of 2 minor criteria, which is mostly based off of laboratory values. So I think it's an interesting concept. A lot of this work comes out of a group from Canada, but we don't have a lot of research around this. It's something that we should be probably researching more in the future. So in summary, mesh infections, macroporous mesh has the best chance of salvage. PTFE and composite PTFE polypropylenes have high failure rates. Enteroprosthetic fistulas require an operation. Don't try and get through this without an operation. Chronic pain should be multimodal therapy, and consider surgery when it does fail because it can be useful. And then Asia syndrome is something to consider when patients come in with it, but I think we need more research to really understand that this is happening. So thank you.